Good morning. Good morning. I'm Dr. Tracy Alexander, known as Dr. T. And I have to say, it is a joy and it's an honor to be here with you today. This is the day we have been waiting for. We are here to talk with Ambassador Susan Rice. This is let me exhale for a moment. And those of you that know me know I just need to take an exhale moment and then inhale what is about to happen today. Westchester women, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so happy that you are here. This is the moment. Now, before I get started, Ambassador, allow me just to do a quick introduction for those that may not know. They may not know your background, so let me just let them know. Susan Rice served 8 years in the Obama administration, first as ambassador to the United Nations, and then as national security advisor. She's a student of history and a passionate defender of American values. Her book, Tough Love, My Story of the Things Worth Fighting For, is the tale of an African-American child raised in the overwhelmingly white world, the official world of Washington, D.C., by accomplished parents in a troubled marriage, who rose fast in U.S. foreign policy ranks while learning to celebrate her heritage and juggle her career, her marriage, and motherhood. And more importantly, she did all of this and is still doing this as she manages her business, Ambassador Susan Rice. And I just want to say, Ambassador, everyone has a copy of your book, and you know I love to hold up the book. I hope you can see it. I hope you can see it with my tags in it, you know, my little notes to myself. So let's get started.
Well, thank you so much, Tracy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm great to be with you all.
I just want to start with joining us. We have about 300 women from Westchester. We have men too, but we have a diverse and dynamic group of people joining us this morning. And that being said, Westchester women, this is our summit, and it's really important to talk about the relationship that women have with each other. And I want to just touch upon this because as I was reading through the book, I noticed there are several women that helped shape Ambassador Susan Rice. And I just want to say a few names, and if you can just reflect on that relationship. Mary Dixon, who immigrated from Jamaica to Portland, Maine in 1912. A maid, a seamstress, didn't finish high school, your grandmother.
Well, my grandmother was an amazing woman. I was so blessed to have her in my life. As you mentioned, she and my grandfather came to Portland, Maine in 1912 as immigrants from Jamaica. My grandfather was a janitor, and my grandmother was a maid. Neither one of them had any real formal education. And like so many immigrants, they came to this country with the hope of being able to give their children a better future. And they came and got married in a cathedral in Portland, Maine, and then had 5 children. 4 boys who were the older ones, and my mother, the last one, the girl. Of my uncles, 2 of them went on to become doctors, one a university president, one an optometrist, and all because my grandparents saved and scraped and worked hard and made education their absolute priority. And my grandmother was amazing. I mean, she would take in laundry and clean people's houses, and at the same time ensure that her daughter got piano lessons and that her sons, went to the library and learned English literature and history and were Eagle Scouts. In 1950, in the state of Maine, my grandmother was named the Mother of Maine. Which is, back in those days, each state had a state mother every year, and then nationally they'd pick the mother of the country. My grandmother was selected despite the fact that she was a rare African-American woman in a very, very white state for her success in raising these 5 children. My mother, who was the baby, as I said, Lois Dixon Rice, was in many ways the anomaly. All of the boys had been able to go to Bowdoin College in Maine, where my grandfather moonlighted as a bartender on the weekends. And they all got scholarships and support to go to Bowdoin, but my mother couldn't go because it was still in 1950 when she graduated from high school, all boys. And they didn't know what to do with her, so they finally figured out that they could send her down to Cambridge to Radcliffe College, as you know, now part of Harvard, and get her education there. My mother, who had been valedictorian of her high school class in Portland, Maine, and a champion debater, ended up as president of her student body at Radcliffe, the entire student body, one of 3 African-American women in her incoming class. And she graduated magna cum laude and marshal of her senior class. And she was just this extraordinary woman with amazing guts and determination and, and grit, and yet a real passion for service and for giving back. And that was a theme that ran through both sides of my family, my father's side, as well as my mother's side. On my father's side, they were, my father was the grandson of slaves in South Carolina, born around 1920 in the heart of segregation. And he became a Tuskegee Airman and then went on to get his PhD in economics. And both my mom and dad had a real focus on service. My mom's career was largely focused on higher education and enabling low-income Americans of all different backgrounds to be able to attend college. She was known as the mother of the Pell Grant program, which has enabled 80 million Americans to attend college. And then she went on to a later career in the corporate world, where she ended up sitting on 11 publicly traded corporate boards. So she was a force and a working mother throughout my upbringing, at a time when many of the mothers of my classmates were not working, and a pioneer in her field, really at a time when there weren't many women in the boardroom, much less women of color. And so she gave me a real sense of, the importance of knowing who you are and, being a trailblazer and standing up for what you think is right.
Absolutely. Perhaps that's maybe some of the reason why we know you as the fierce champion of American interests and values. And when I hear you talk about your mother, another woman who resonates with me as I was reading through the book is Elizabeth Jennings, Mrs. J.
Mrs. Jennings is somebody extremely special to me. She was the woman who, throughout my childhood, as my mother was working and my parents were going through a bitter and painful divorce, was there with us every day after school, helping us, get our dinners and get ready for bed. And, she was our caregiver and took care of our house as well. And she was an extraordinary woman who came from a very different background. She herself was a mother of 3, came from a low-income part of Washington, D.C., but was just hardcore, striving, committed, hardworking woman who succeeded in giving her family what they needed to thrive as well. And she's somebody that now is over 90 years old. She survived long after both my parents and remains somebody special in our lives.
Two other women I just want to bring up, your friend and your mentor, Madeleine Albright. Madeleine Albright.
Well,
I know
everybody knows who Madeleine Albright is. Obviously the first woman Secretary of State, former UN ambassador. And my boss, when she was Secretary of State, I was the Assistant Secretary of State starting at age 32 for African Affairs in the State Department. And she was the one primarily responsible for bringing me into that role. But I've known Madeleine Albright, who I speak of today as the closest thing I still have alive to a mother, as somebody that, when I was a child, was in my life. That she and my mother became friends because I went to school with Madeleine's daughters, who are roughly my age. And my mother and Madeleine served together on the board of our elementary school, which Madeleine Albright was the chair of the board. My mother was a member of the board. And that's when they became friends early on. So our families would get together for Sunday lunches. My dad and her former husband used to play tennis together on the weekends, and we were family friends. And she was, you know, to me at an early age, the mother of some kids at my, you know, at my school. But then as I grew into a young professional, she really went out of her way to guide me and support me, having been a trailblazer in the field of foreign policy and diplomacy. She helped me with many early job opportunities, and throughout gave me extraordinary advice and support. And to this day, she is somebody that I rely on for wisdom and encouragement and just, you know, camaraderie.
Indeed, indeed. And one more person who that resonated with me when I read the transition, and how when you were going back to Oxford and trying to decide if it's law school, is it law school next? That would be then Professor Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Right. Well, I hope people may be familiar with Eleanor Holmes Norton. She has been now for many, many years the District of Columbia's delegate to Congress. The closest thing we have to a congressperson, although we don't have voting representation in the House and nobody in the Senate. But at the time, when I was a graduate student, between my master's degree and trying to figure out, do I stay at Oxford where I was doing my master's degree and continue on to get my PhD in international relations, or do I go to law school back in the US, which had been long my plan? She very kindly took me out to lunch. She was a professor of law then at Georgetown, and she sat me down over lunch, and she said, as I was thinking through this, she put me through a very Socratic discussion. She said, "So do you enjoy what you're studying at Oxford?" And I said, "Yeah, I love my thesis. I love what I've worked on for my master's degree." And she said, "Well, would you be excited about continuing that research to get your PhD?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." And she said, "Well, how many African-American lawyers do you know?" And I said, "More than I can count." And she said, "Well, how many African-American PhDs in international relations do you know?" And I paused and I said, "I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'm sure there are a few, but I can't think of any." And she says, "Well, if you love what you're studying and you stay and get your degree, how old will you be when you finish with your doctorate?" And for reasons that I won't elaborate on, at Oxford, you can actually do it much more quickly than in the United States because you don't have all the teaching responsibilities. I said, "Well, I can probably," as well, "if you love it, why not do it? Get your degree in international relations. And if you still want to go to law school, you're not going to be too old to do that at 25. I said, "Well, that makes a hell of a lot of sense." And that's what I did. And so I blame her for the fact that I started down a career path in international relations and foreign policy and national security. I decided when I was done with my PhD that I had had enough school and didn't want to go to law school at that point.
I understand. I appreciate it. And thank you so much. I just wanted our audience to really get an opportunity to understand that women working together and developing these relationships, that is why and how we have Dr. Susan Rice. And thank you so much. Let's talk about your childhood. Let's talk about your childhood a little bit. Growing up in Washington, D.C., how did that experience shape your direction?
Well, I was born in 1964. In Washington, D.C., just, you know, a few months after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, and literally a few days, well, just shortly after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, and at a very tumultuous time, as many of you who are old enough will remember. You know, in the early years of my childhood, my parents made a point of sitting me down in front of the television set to see Robert Kennedy's casket on the train come from New York to Washington, D.C. When Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated and Washington, D.C. exploded in violence and riots, and much of our downtown was burnt down, my parents took me and my little brother, I was just 4 years old and he was in a stroller, down to the 14th Street corridor to see what had happened and to understand the pain and the anguish that was behind that violence. And they took me to the mall in the same period, where the Poor People's Campaign was camped out in the mud to carry on Dr. King's vision of fighting poverty following his assassination. And so I was steeped, because of my parents, in the news of the day and the issues of the moment. And their intention was to convey to me, even as young as I was, that, and to my brother who was even younger, that we are part of a community. We are part of a country and a world, and we are not apart from it. And while we had personally a degree of comfort and security, that we had a responsibility to be part of this larger society and help to make it better. And so they would sit us down in front of the television set, whether it was to see the man land on the moon, or the war in Vietnam, or to follow the Watergate proceedings, so that we understood that there was a larger context. And they very much impressed upon me in their different ways. Both of them committed to service. My father, served on the Federal Reserve Board as a governor of the Federal Reserve, but before that, he worked at the Treasury Department and the World Bank. And my mother, with her work in higher education policy and on the Pell Grant program, really instilled in us that that our mission was to give back. It wasn't enough to take the blessings that we were privileged to have because of the hard work of my grandparents and my parents and hoard them or keep them to ourselves. Whatever we did, whether it was in the private sector or in the nonprofit sector or in government, our aim ought to be to make things better for others, not just for ourselves.
Indeed, indeed. And that confidence, the courage, the grit, I just want to get into this next question. As a strong woman leader, you're often held to a task about your bold managerial style. Now, you've been known to be smart, sharp, tongued, and relentless. And I might even say, I'm going to page 12, where in the book you say, I don't mind much if some people don't like me. Love that. Love when you wrote that. And
but finish the sentence.
Right. And the reason why I say, yeah, the sentence, the question I have is, these qualities in a man's world would be positive, but women, we're criticized for having these qualities. Why do you think that is? And how have you learned to navigate that double standard?
Well, Traci, let me finish my thought in the book. What I said was, it's not that I don't want to be liked, but if people don't like me, I'd rather be respected than liked if I had to make a choice. And I try to explain that, I've discovered as a woman of conviction, as an African-American who's unafraid to say what I think and be direct and clear in my communication, that there's some people that I've encountered along the way, as many of us have, who find that off-putting. I'm not coming to ask for affirmation or permission to be who I am, and in some contexts that's something that many people have some difficulty with, and I think it's a problem that women face broadly. And my reaction to it is, look, you're absolutely right. There is a enormous double standard. Men who are confident, men who speak with authority, men who have the courage of their convictions and are willing to speak plainly and lead boldly, are heralded as conquering heroes, and women are considered bitches. And let's be honest. And my view of that is, not only is it wrong and a double standard that we absolutely have to call out, but the flip side of it is, it's not as if the doors are opening more widely to us when we're polite and demure and deferential. So my judgment is, and this is not just about my leadership style or my communication style, but it's about every aspect of who I am. Is if people don't like it, then that's their choice. But I'm not going to change who I am, because this is myself
Mhm.
as authentically as I can be. And it's largely served me well. And I would much rather, do my best, give my fullest contribution, bring it with integrity and hopefully as often as possible, good judgment, and always with good intentions. And if there are those who have difficulty with that, then my view is that's going to be their problem, not mine.
Thank you so much. And thank you, because I think our audience, we need to hear that. I know I need to be reminded that, it's not always about being liked, but respect me, because I'm going to speak my truth. And what I appreciate, and I just want to thank you right now, you speak truth to power. Every night, you are giving us your truth, and I thank you for that. Now, I'm going to have to talk about Benghazi. There's a lot in the book about what you went through on that day, the Benghazi crisis. You were clearly politicized and demonized for that Sunday talk, that talk show appearance. That wasn't your decision. In fact, you've been identified as a villain in the right wing media for so much. You recall in Tough Love that your brother John, right? He said, you didn't fight back, or you didn't promote yourself like a man would have. So my question is, what lessons did you take away from that situation, and what advice do you give to other leaders, particularly, especially women leaders?
Well, there's a lot in that. So
Right. We got to unpack that. Right. Right. Right.
There's a chapter in the book on Benghazi
Mm-hmm.
where I lay out, how I ended up going on the Sunday shows, what I said, how what I was asked to say was a reflection of the best intelligence that we had available at that moment. And I caveated it and said it might change as we get more information. And it turned out to be, as I explained in the book, wrong in one critical respect, that there were not demonstrations outside of our facility in Benghazi. But the other things that I said ended up, after subsequent investigation, to have been validated. But in the context of the 2012 election, and it was really about this time in 2012, mid-September, when, as you can imagine, in the height of the political context and the election campaign, that the President Obama's opponent seized on my talk show appearances to try to accuse him and him through me of misleading the American people about the nature of the terrorist attacks that occurred, which was, could not have been further from the truth, as the 8 congressional committees led by Republicans who ultimately investigated every aspect of Benghazi concluded. They all determined that I didn't intentionally mislead the American people in any way, shape, or form. But despite that, I've become a rather popular villain, particularly in right-wing media. And I think I say in the book that I become a recyclable boogeyman, so that on, Fox News to this day, they can call my name at night and people get all excited and, wound up. But, for me, the experience really, as I relate in the book, was far beyond that Sunday, September 16th, 2012, but it extended through the whole fall after the election and into the question of my being considered for Secretary of State. And my brother's wisdom to me was that in the context of being considered for Secretary of State after the election, that I should have been more concerned about, boosting my own chances for being selected, that I should have promoted myself, that I should have, taken the opportunities that presented themselves for other people to lobby on my behalf or campaign on my behalf. And that was not my approach. In this context, my view was, I'm on this team to help the country and help the administration achieve its objectives. This is not about me. It's not about my interests or ambitions. And by the way, President Obama knows me very well, and he gets to make his own decision about who he wants in that role. And I didn't think that it would be wise or productive to try to, campaign on my own behalf. But what my brother was saying is that, any other guy would have done that and wouldn't have cared about the mission or giving the president his own decision space or whatever. Now, so what are the lessons of that? I think that in that particular context, I still think that my approach was the best approach in terms of how I handled that question of giving the president the space to make his own decision. I ended up doing quite well anyway, serving as national security advisor. And John Kerry ended up doing quite well serving as Secretary of State, and we were a great team together. But the broader question that my brother raised, I think really has validity, which is that there is a tendency, I think, for women to, as I often do, to subordinate themselves to the mission or the enterprise or the team at moments where it might be beneficial to not just have the interests of the team at heart, which I always think you must, but also to be more active and aggressive in terms of promoting oneself. And I'm just not, that's not my instinct. In part because I've been maybe excessively blessed to have relative success without having to do that. And, but I do think that women need to understand that, if we're playing by one set of rules and men are playing by another set of rules, we're at a disadvantage. And I think in many settings, we have to be better advocates for ourselves. It's the guys who are going in at the end of the year to the boss and demanding a pay raise because of how hard they worked and the fact that, they're the principal breadwinner. That's an old school, outdated approach that we can't allow to squeeze us out of the opportunities that we deserve. The persistent gaps in compensation between men and women have their roots in some structural things, but I think also to some extent in women's reticence to call that out collectively and individually. So I do think that that my brother, who is a champion of women and minorities and people who aspire to achieve the success that they're capable of, but may be disadvantaged in getting there. His advice is you got to be able and willing to advocate for yourself and put your modesty or humility aside sometimes in service of that.
Indeed. And I just want to say, I love with the opening pitch at the Nationals Park, you made sure Fox News, they couldn't get you on that pitch. You did your thing on that.
Well, Traci, just to explain this I say in the book that the most nervous I've ever been in a public context was when it was my responsibility to throw out the opening pitch in late July of 2013 at Nationals Park. I'd never thrown out an opening pitch. I'm a pretty decent athlete, but baseball was never my primary sport, or softball. And this was a moment where I had to get up in front of the entire stadium, and my determination was I wasn't going to throw a dirt ball, and I was going to throw from the mound. I wasn't going to throw from in front of the mound and make it a little bit easier. And so I had the good fortune of having several security agents on my detail, able and willing to throw balls with me intermittently for, whenever we got a break over the prior month. And they were really concerned for me. They did not want to see me throw a dirt ball either. And so we practiced. And when time came to take the mound, I walked out on the field in National Stadium with my family and with my brother and his family. And it was amazing because there were all these cheers, but yet they were really still audible boos as well. So it was a kind of a mixture. And this is not quite a year after Benghazi. And I got up on the mound and there was this sort of sudden realization that, oh my God, I have no time. I've just got to wind up and throw this thing. And I wound up and threw it, and it was a strike. And I have never felt more relief in my entire life. And I'm never throwing an opening pitch again because I'm one and done. And why mess with success?
Right, right. I love it. I love it. I just want to switch gears a little bit because we can talk all day with Ambassador, but we know we only have a limited amount of time. You touched upon this a little earlier, but in the book, you mentioned one of your earliest memories is when your parents took you to see the aftermath in Washington, D.C., talking about the riots following Dr. King's assassination. Now, having that experience then and seeing the current unrest regarding the social unrest, the racial injustices, what are your feelings? What are your thoughts about Black Lives Matter movement? And finally, what does our country need to do to address the inequality?
Well, let's speak first of all. Speaking about my own personal views of the Black Lives Matter movement and the broader uh, racial justice movement that we've seen underway in this country,
Right.
particularly since the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing. I think it's incredible that we have had literally in every state of this country, all 50 states, in areas rural and urban, uh, Americans of all backgrounds, white, black, Latino, and Native, Asian,
Mhm.
come together, young and old, to say collectively, we can do better. This is not right.
Mhm.
This is
Mhm.
not, doesn't represent who all of us want to be. And it's been an amazing movement. And I think it has the real potential, um, with responsible leadership, to be an opportunity for us to really again come to terms with, in 400 years of very difficult history that has left African Americans in this country still in a place of significant inequality. Now, that's not to say we haven't made extraordinary progress, that, things are certainly better in my generation than they were in my parents and grandparents. But we have seen through in the continued um, brutality meted out against African American men and women, uh, mostly unarmed, just how our criminal justice system is not suited to treating African Americans equally in all circumstances, and in many circumstances doing the opposite. And we've also seen in the context of the coronavirus
Mhm.
just how deadly for
Right.
all Americans, not just for African Americans and Latino Americans who are suffering disproportionately, but how deadly for all Americans our racial and socioeconomic disparities are. When you have large segments of the population who don't have access to health care, have terrible housing conditions, live in environmentally polluted uh, circumstances, don't have adequate education, don't have the opportunity to rise and have economic mobility, so that they're stuck in low paying, difficult conditions of work. And it's people of all backgrounds. It's substantially African Americans and Latinos, but it's white Americans working in very difficult contexts in the meatpacking industry, or in agriculture, or what have you. And while we have these gross socioeconomic disparities, something like disease can whip through our society and affect not just those at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, but all of us. And tank our economy, keep our kids out of school. So the bottom line is, we're all in this boat together, whether we like it or not.
Mhm.
As a
Mhm.
nation, we sink or swim together, and we have not been acting as if we understand that to be the case. So in terms of what we need to do, Traci, in my judgment, we need a sweeping uh, uh, reform of our social and economic infrastructure. If we have systemic racism, which I believe we do, we need systemic reforms. And that's not just in the realm of criminal justice, as important as that is. And there's legislation at the federal level that's been passed by the House, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It's
Mhm.
like so much else sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk in the Senate going nowhere. We've had some efforts at the state and local level to address the challenge of criminal justice reform. But beyond that, we really need to look at all of these aspects that I've described, from health to education to housing to environment, and think about how do we use government as well as the private sector to try to make investments that are consciously aimed at closing these disparities, the racial disparities and the socioeconomic disparities that are not tied solely to race. Because in the absence of doing that, we're becoming more and more unequal. And I believe more and more fragile as a cohesive society, as a democracy, and as a country that is able to grow and prosper and survive through adversity.
Thank you. Thank you for just addressing that. And I know, you know, I can't escape what's happening. You know, the stories unfolding this morning right before we started. Of course, I wanted to watch the latest on what was being said that the president knew, clearly from, you know, Bob Woodard's book. You know, we don't have time to delve into that, but all I can say is we're looking forward to seeing you tonight and tomorrow night and next week, just to stay on guard and help us unpack this information and speak truth to power. And I'll leave it there. I want to switch gears a little bit. Clearly, you know, you are a mother, okay, a mother to Jake and to Maris. And you talk about in the book having to juggle motherhood. And I think some of us sitting in the audience right now, we can kind of appreciate some of this. In your book, you talk about pumping breast milk on your official trip to Africa while your infant is 1,000 miles away, and conducting a long distance marriage with your husband. How has public life affected how you raise your children?
Well, it's a really important and complex question, and obviously everybody's situation is different. You know,
Right.
in my case, I had the extraordinary blessing of having a husband as a partner who was very supportive of the work I was doing in government, despite having his own intense career as a journalist. He's a fully engaged parent and sometimes a more than equal contributor to what goes on in our household. And I had kids, and we'll, I guess, get to talking to a little bit about them. One, our son now is just 23, recently graduated from college.
Right.
Our daughter is about to turn 18, going into her senior year in high school. But they were young. I mean, Jake, my eldest, was born just before I started as Assistant Secretary of State in the Clinton administration at age 32. And so I was in that very early and intense job, you know, a breastfeeding mom in the State Department, which was its own experience. But even when I joined the Obama administration in 2009, our daughter was 8, and you know, our son was you know, just over 12, and they were very, you know, they were still very small, certainly in terms of their understanding of what I was doing, and how it would affect them. And I have to say, despite all of that, they were also supportive as best they could at that early age. And I tried really hard to make my work something that they could relate to and learn from. So when I was UN ambassador, for example, and I was living up in New York during the week, and my family was in Washington, and I tried to get home on the weekends, when I could, I tried to get my kids up to New York to see the United Nations and to, you know, and to see the work that I was doing and meet the people I was doing it with, so that they could relate. And if I had the opportunity to take them to some fun stuff, like, you know, fireworks at the White House, so that they felt like there was something, you know, in it for them, as they're having to, you know, to give up their mother for most of the week. I tried to do that too. And I have to say that my husband, my kids, my parents when they were alive, were all extraordinarily supportive. And I was very blessed in that regard, but it does take a toll. My daughter suffered, as I write in the book,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for a period of time during the Benghazi experience, because she couldn't understand at that young age what was happening and why her mother was being vilified, and it affected her. And these kids now, as almost adults, in one case certainly an adult, have a very real understanding of the complexity of public service in this environment, and how it's become a brutal contact sport. And that when you get in to serve for the right reasons, as I've certainly tried to do, that despite your motives in serving, there will be, vicious attacks, and that they will be collateral damage. And that's something we had to talk through, Traci, very seriously as a family, as I was being considered for vice president. This brought everything back in a real way. These kids had to reckon with, well, what is it going to mean for us?
Right.
And they're no longer, little, they're grown-ups. And so it's not easy. When you step into the arena at a senior level now, it's full combat, which is, it's tragic, and it's combat that affects the people who love you most.
Thank you. I think you really help me, and you help the audience. Many of us who sit in the seats of trying to balance and juggle motherhood, business, our career, marriage, life, taking care of children, families, and just being able to have an honest conversation, that it is challenging, and that you do have to consider so many different people in the household. And that gets me, I just want to touch upon the fact that I know your son may have some different political ideologies. And is it difficult for you that your son has a different viewpoint? And do you find it conflicting, or is it exciting for you? I can only imagine, the dinner table around Thanksgiving and holiday time.
I guess it depends on what you describe or define as exciting. Yeah, the reality is, I've got, as I mentioned, 2 kids. My son, the elder, is a conservative, and a committed conservative, and he was in college active in his college Republicans organization. Mm-hmm. My daughter is very progressive. So I've got one of each. Mm-hmm. And I'm very proud of both of them, and I love them both dearly. But my son and I, as I was write at some length in the book, have some substantial policy differences. And I try to even lay out sort of what they are and where the fault lines are. And it's led to, it causes difficulty at times, and we disagree strenuously on some things, and sometimes it gets a little hot. But at the end of the day, we're very close, and we understand, as do my husband and daughter, that family is more important than anything else, more important than politics, is more important than jobs. And at the end of the day, we have to remember, just as I believe we have to do as a country, that we have more that unites us than divides us. And we can't allow our political differences, as difficult as it may be, and trust me, it's difficult at times, to be something that causes us to fail as a family. And so we work at it constantly. And knock on wood, so far we're succeeding. Mm-hmm. But it does have its challenges, but it also, as you suggest in your question, it has real benefits. I have much more insight than I'm certain I otherwise would into how a substantial segment of our country is thinking and feeling about the issues of the day. He is a very good, reflection and explainer of a perspective that I don't share and wouldn't otherwise have as much understanding of. And I think we have to listen to each other. We have to understand each other. We have to struggle as a nation to recognize that we have much more in common than that which divides us. And if we don't, if we give up trying to listen, to understand, to debate, hopefully with civility, and to grab onto that which we share, then, just like as a family can fail, we can fail as a nation. And we have to avoid that at all costs, in my judgment.
And I have so many more questions, and I know time is not kind to us this morning. And I just want to ask you one final question. And I'll wrap it up by just asking you if you can quickly give us, I always talk about pearls of wisdom, sharing your pearls. And what pearls could you give to us as we move forward to November 3rd? The election is coming. I just want to know, what pearls of wisdom does Ambassador Rice have for us that we can take away from this conversation to move us all forward? If you can tell us that in less than a minute. I know, right?
First of all, thank you for this. And thank you all for being part of it. This truly is the most consequential election of my lifetime, I think of all of our lifetimes. And I think that truly the fate of and the stability of our democracy and our ability to remain a unitary nation is at stake. We cannot allow ourselves to collapse and be divided from within. And so whatever your political perspective, be engaged, vote early, have a plan. Don't wait till the last minute. This is going to be one of the most complicated elections mechanically that we have ever experienced. So I think our voices matter more than ever. So have a plan, vote early, if you can, by, in person or absentee. Don't fail to get your vote in and counted one way or the other. And encourage those around you to do the same, to be engaged, to exercise your vote, your voice, to contribute in whatever way you can, whether it's financially or through, texting, getting out the vote. This is a moment where we have to own our democracy, because there are those who want to take it away from us. And I don't care whether you're a conservative Republican like my son or a progressive like my daughter. We have a shared stake in our ability to remain a vibrant and cohesive democracy. And this is a moment where we have to prove it.
Dr. Rice, I thank you. I thank you. I wish we had another hour with you. But I just want to thank you for your candor. I want to thank you for speaking your truth. I want to thank you for sharing your journey, empowering us this morning. And I just want to say, we will see you. We will be watching you, looking forward to seeing you each and every night so we could stay informed. And we thank you for all of the work that you do. And I also want to thank your family for sharing you with us, because the world is a greater place because of you. Thank you so much. Now, please hold tight. On that note, I just want to give a quick housekeeping note. I want to thank everybody, all of our 300 guests, for joining us this morning. Now, for those of you who have purchased a VIP ticket, please, 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 you will have to click onto the link for the VIP meet and greet with Ambassador Susan Rice. Otherwise, please enjoy these messages from our sponsors. The first workshop will begin at 10:10. We will see you there. Thank you so much, Westchester women. We have had an amazing summit, and we've got more in store. We'll see you soon.